video explains how to handle updates to either the firmware or the file system for this project. And we're going to work through some of these to be able to show you what's the best way of doing that, as well as when you make decisions concerning the attachment or removal of hardware, what needs to be done. So an update incorporates a number of things. They can be bug fixes which have been reported and now fixed an issue. It could be improvements related to existing code or new features and functionality added, as well as changes to web pages, major updates which affect a lot of things, as well as minor updates, which basically just a few fixes to bugs, etc., nothing major. The answer though is that it really depends. Eventually you're going to get to a stage where new hardware, you buy a new desktop, laptop, new OS, new versions of Arduino IDE, new versions of the ESP32 Core, results in the fact that you're going to have to recompile software at any given time. You can't tell when it's going to happen. And there is a sense of satisfaction knowing that your system's up to date and it's doing what you want it to do. Now, let's look at upgrading the firmware and file system and what is the best way to do that. So let's say I put out a new version, which is 32208, and there's quite a few changes to that. So I go to the project website and I download the zip file and extract it. And then I compare whether or not I'm going to make any changes to config.sys or whether I'm going to leave it the same as what is the firmware currently in there. You should never delete the folder that contains the firmware files because you're going to need to reference it at some stages. And every time there's an update, you should look at what's defined in the previous version that is now in your Focuser and look for changes. So if you decide, okay, I'm going to download this firmware, but I'm also going to change the Focuser to a different board, then that's a change in config.sys. And if before you're running a display and now you're going to run this update, but you want the display off or not attached, not defined, then that's also a change. And so if there are no changes to config.sys, what do? Well, the first thing you do before you actually start programming the controller is you need to set a known state. So you log into the existing management server first, you click the motor tab, you click the motor link on the web browser at the bottom on the nav bar, and you set the focus position to 0. You tell it to go to 0, and you wait for the move to complete, and then you click save to save the current state. You click links on the nav bar and you save the configuration files. We're now on the motor page, and what we need to do is we need to tell the Focuser to go home at position 0. So we click the go to button, and we can see here that the focus position is moving. And we wait for that to wind down to 0. So here we are, we're at position 0 now. So I've clicked on the links file. I've expanded config files, and there are 2 files here which I need to save these. So I'm just going to open it up like that. I can copy and paste this into a text editor like this, and now I can save these as first one same name. So I've saved it. And then I'll go back and I'll do the next one, which is the Focuser one. And I'll copy this. And I'll paste this in here. And I'll save this as Focuser. Controller Focuser.json. So there we have, and we've done that. So now that we've selected and saved those configuration files, next up we're going to click on the system link on the nav bar, and we're going to use Control-A to select all the text, and we're going to paste all of that information in a new file called oldsystem.txt. So we're on the system page. First thing you do is you have to expand all of these. Oh, sorry, there's no quick way to do this. So here we are, we've nearly got them all expanded. And then we go Control-A to select them all, Control-C to copy them, go into the particular text file, and I paste all of that, and you can see here, so as the various settings are actually all saved, and then we can save this as old system dot text. So having copied those files, the next thing to do is to load up the Arduino IDE, check the config.8 settings. So I'll do that part now. So let's load this up into the Arduino IDE. And we want to be able to go and have a look at config.h, and I'm not using this. I know my previous version was using a PC board, and it was the V8825, so I'll change that. I know that I'm changing the step mode using software. I know that this is wrong because that's the definition for 28BYJ, and what I'm actually using is this one. Oh, sorry. That's fine. That's fine. Station. I was using the Wi-Fi config. I was using DNS. I wasn't using any of that, and I was using duck DNS as well. So now this config.h configuration is the same as what's running on my controller at the moment. So all of those are set, and what we'll do now is we need to make sure that this is correct, and it's not. And so it's ESP32s3, and this is a dev kit, so there it is. We'll select this, click OK, and now what we'll do is we'll send this up to the controller by going upload. So it'll compile a link and upload this new firmware 32208, and config.h now in here looks exactly the same as what I had previously in 32207. So we're linking everything together, It's been successful in the compilation, and now of course you can see here that it's sending the compiled version up to the controller. So that's the firmware. If I hold down left shift control P, I can get access to the upload for the file system. It's now ready because it said hard resetting, so we'll send up the file system. Now I could have opened config.h, the one that's running on the controller from the previous version of the firmware, because I never deleted the folder, right? And then I could compare this against what Notepad said and make sure they're the same. Right, so it's compiled and uploaded and the file system's there. What do we do next? We've gone ahead and done all of this, and I now have a controller that is actually running the new firmware with all the settings that the old one had. And I did all of that because there basically wasn't any changes in the config.h file from the previous version in the controller to this one now. So when I downloaded the firmware release 32208 and looked at config.h, I actually made config.h match what the previous one was. And the reason why I didn't copy it was because config.h may be subject to change, and we could add some new things in, we could delete a few things, so you don't want to just copy your previous config.h into the new firmware. Right, so that's all up and running. Now, what happens if I download the new firmware, but I also want to make some changes in config.h which are not the same as the version that's running in my controller before the upgrade? So if that's the case, it has to be different. You can't change, for example, a focuser name or anything like that. You can't do that in config.h on an upgrade. What you have to do is you have to make sure that you're treating this as a completely new install. And because of that, you don't bother to save the controller board and controller focuser files, because these need to be generated for the new focuser name. And because you've changed it, all these details here need to be different to match the new focuser name. So you can't turn around and copy the old ones up, because they're going to be for the old focuser name that's on your controller now. But after the upgrade, it has to represent the new focuser name, so those two files have to be created at boot time. And if you have a look at these particular videos, it will actually guide you through that particular process. What about if we wanted to compile the existing firmware we've got, but change some hardware, for example, home position switch, in-out LEDs, push buttons? So it just says all we have to do is access the manager server inputs page from the nav bar, set the required state. So for home position switch, in-out LEDs, push buttons, this is what we will do now. Management server, we have to go, what was it, to inputs. So then the LEDs are disabled, etc. in the current version that I'm running, but I want to put in some LEDs and a joystick, so I can enable these. I can set whatever the mode is to be. Move indicates that at the start of the move, the in LED and out LEDs are turned on, and at the end of the move, they're turned off. If I change this to pulse, it means every time there's a step to the stepper motor, I light up the in and out LEDs. And after that step has completed, a single step, I turn them off again. So this will generate pulses to the in-out LEDs, but the move one, it's on continuously while the move is happening. That's what that means. And if I wanted a joystick, I just go enable, and of course I'd set whatever the parameters were, and I do that via the calibrate routine. What you want to do is make sure that if you are enabling a joystick, then you do that before changing the state. If you don't, the program's going to think there's a joystick attached. It's going to read the joystick values and it's going to start stepping. So, and eventually it'll either hit max steps or home. So you don't want to enable a joystick if it's not actually fitted to the controller. Adding or removing temperature probes is slightly different. It's not done on the inputs page, but you can access it on the temp link on the nav bar. So let's go and have a look at temp. In this particular instance, what I've done is I've actually powered down the controller, disconnected it, etc. And I've attached a temperature probe. After attaching the temperature probe, I powered up the controller, and we're looking at the temp page. So I can enable it just like that, and I can start it. I don't have one physically connected at the moment, so this is why it's not starting or running. I can select whatever mode I want, Celsius, Fahrenheit. I can set the resolution, and the current temperature being read is a default of 20 degrees Celsius. And all these other settings are for temperature compensation, and I will cover that when we look at the management server in detail. If I remove a temperature probe, the Focuser currently had one, then what I would do is I'd come in here, I would click the disable button to ensure that the state stays disabled, and it will also automatically stop the temperature probe if the temperature probe was running at the time. So that's how the temperature probe can be enabled or disabled, and you didn't have to recompile the firmware for this just because you were changing temperature probe, and you didn't have to regenerate firmware for changes in any LEDs, joystick or push buttons, because the LEDs, the joystick, the push button and temperature probe are part of the default configuration. There's no way you specified in config.h. Display is not part of the default configuration. So if you got a display attached, what you do is you would power off the controller, remove any USB cables and power. You'd then remove the display, you'd power up the controller, and you'd disable it on the display page. If you were adding one, same process in terms of power off the focuser, disconnect it all, add the display to the appropriate header, requires 4 pins, and then power up the controller, go to the display page, enable and start it. So let's go through that process. Let's go to the display page. It is currently, I've removed the display, so this is what it looks like when it's disabled. These settings down here where it says show pause when moving, page time, how long the page is displayed for, and the brightness levels. All those you can change, but you can't change the start status. Can't be changed because it hasn't found a display. So if you added a display, it would come in here and I'll tell you, yes, there is a display defined here. It wouldn't be NA, it could be graphics, for example. but it will say state disabled and status is stopped. And you just click the enable button and it will change to enabled. Then you click the start button and it will show running. And because I don't have one attached, this is why if I click start, it still says stopped. If you change something in config.sys, do you have to generate new firmware? And this page shows you that if you make the following changes different, if you change what these are compared to what you have now, if you make those changes to any of those in the new config.sys file for the downloaded new firmware update, if you change any of these, you have to, no choice, you have to generate new firmware and upload it to the controller, after which you must use the little FS plugin to upload the file system. So if you fail to do that, then your controller is going to give you a lot of grief. Is there a way to reset the controller back to the default settings? Like you've downloaded the firmware at some stage, maybe it's 322-07. You then went through a configuration process. Is it possible to reset the controller back to, like, this is brand new, just downloaded, you need to make all the changes again? Well, the answer is yes. On the lock page, you click reset and it will go through and it will rewrite the files for you to be able to go back to default. So let's have a look. This is the lock page, of course, and it's just simple. Click here. So let's go out and do this. So what we do is we first of all lock it. We then hit reset settings. Now at this stage you can back out, but if you click OK, it's going to do it. And what happens is after I click OK, it's going to do all the file changes that are necessary, and then without asking you, it's going to reboot the controller. So you go, yeah, okay, fine, go ahead and do that. And I'm not going to get a response back, remember, because the controller is in the process of rebooting. So I have to wait for the boot process to finish, and it takes a few seconds to do this, before I can go and have a look at it again. So this is eventually going to time out. And at that particular stage, we will be able to refresh the page. So the page is refreshed now because I selected it and pressed enter. You notice here it now says lock. The current state of it is unlocked. And that's because the lock status, when it's locked and you reboot the controller, the locked status changes from locked to unlocked when the thing reboots. And if we were to go out and have a look at system and then compare it to what we had before, and if I have a look at the Focuser settings, the default Focuser settings is 5,000. And I mean, during the post configuration, you change a lot of this. Max steps is 20,000. Coil power is disabled. Delay after move is disabled. Motor step is set to fast and the default motor speed delay. So you recognize all of these things these will be the value of these settings, which are the default configuration. So it has in fact applied these settings to your controller by choosing that particular option to switch back to the default. What happens if the ESP32 Core gets changed? There's a new version out. Well, you have to go back over the same process of actually modifying the boards.txt file as well as copying the partition file up into the ESP32 core. So you edit the boards.txt file, you add the definitions for the TZT board as well as for the new chip that we're using, DevKit C1, WRIM1, and the procedure about how to do that is covered in part 2 of the PDF, as well as there's a video which I did covering all the partition schemes and how we modify those files, etc. So the information's there and you only have to apply it.